My name is Dr. Alina Vance. I'm 38, and I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Mount Sinai. In the middle of saving a patient's life, my rival, Marcus Thorne, stormed in with the board and ordered me to stop. They wanted me to scrap the waiting donor heart and replace it with an artificial one from the OmniMed Corporation. They weren't just trying to kill my patient, a journalist on the verge of exposing their crimes. They were trying to turn me into the murderer. If I complied, I'd be a killer. If I refused, my career would be destroyed. They thought it was the perfect murder. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot every OR has a camera for teaching purposes, and my nurse made damn sure that camera was rolling. The proof of their conspiracy is now in my hands, and they're about to learn a very hard lesson. Never make a surgeon your target, because we know exactly where to cut to cause the most damage. The OR lights hummed a familiar, sterile tune. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. For a surgeon, this room, bathed in unwavering white light, is a sanctuary, a place of absolute control, of precise, calculated actions where millimeters decide fates. My world was a 10-foot circle of pale green drapes, a symphony of beeps and hisses from the machines that sustained life, and the quiet, focused breathing of my team. And in this circle, I was a god. Vitals! My voice was calm, cutting through the low tension of the room. Stable, doctor. BP 110/70. Heart rate 85 and steady. Dr. Lena Petrova, my anesthesiologist, responded without looking up from her monitors. Her Russian accent was a comforting, rhythmic presence in my operating theater. My eyes, magnified by my surgical loupes, were fixed on the landscape of a human chest. The sternum was open, held apart by a retractor, revealing the tired, failing heart of Mr. Alastair Davies. It beat weakly, a faltering drum signaling the end of its long march. He was a writer, a man who had made his living exposing inconvenient truths. Now, an inconvenient truth of his own genetics was killing him. Liam, suction. Liam, my lead surgical nurse, anticipated the command before I finished it. The clear tube was in my hand, its quiet hiss a counterpoint to the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. For 10 years, Liam had been my shadow in the OR. He knew my next move before I did, a silent dance of perfect understanding built on 1,000 procedures. "The donor heart is viable and prepped, doctor," he said in his low, steady voice. "Perfect match. The universe was smiling on Mr. Davies today." "The universe doesn't smile, Liam. It's just a series of statistical probabilities," I murmured, my focus absolute. "Let's not leave this to chance. Time to bypass." This was the critical moment, the point of no return. We were about to stop Mr. Davies, heart and lungs, handing his life over to the heart-lung machine. It was a procedure I had performed hundreds of times, yet the profound responsibility never lessened. The weight of a life in my hands was a familiar pressure, a gravity that kept me grounded. As the team moved with practiced efficiency to connect the cannulas to the aorta and vena cava, my mind replayed the morning's brief, but irritating, conversation with Dr. Marcus Thorne. He had caught me outside the scrub room, his smile too wide, his suit too expensive. Thorne was everything I was. He was a surgeon who spent more time in boardrooms than operating rooms, a politician in scrubs. "Eliner, big day," he'd boomed, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Alastair Davies, the Pulitzer Prize winner, quite a catch for Mount Sinai." "He's a patient, Marcus, not a trophy," I had replied, pulling my scrub cap on. Of course. "Just saying, the press will have a field day with this one. A success here will do wonders for the new cardiothoracic wing fundraising." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, OmniMed was asking about this case. Their new OmniCore V7 artificial heart, they said it would be perfect for a high-profile patient like Davies. A real showcase." I had stopped and looked him in the eye. "The OmniCore is experimental, unproven, and has a list of potential complications as long as my arm. Mr. Davies is getting a healthy, human heart. End of discussion." Thorne had held up his hands in mock surrender. "Your call, Chief. You're the one with the magic hands, just trying to keep our donors happy." The memory vanished as the soft chime of the bypass machine announced its takeover. The tired heart in front of me stilled. The room fell into a deeper level of quiet. The only sound was the machine, breathing and beating for the man on the table. My team watched me waiting. This was my stage. "Scalpel," I said. The cold steel felt like an extension of my own fingers. With practiced, steady movements, I began the delicate process of excising the diseased organ, carefully dissecting the great vessels. Each cut was precise, economical. There was no room for error, no space for doubt. "So, Liam," I said, breaking the silence as I worked. It kept the team relaxed, focused. "Your daughter's recital, how did the Tchaikovsky go?" "She butchered it, doctor," he said with a sigh that was barely audible. "But she looked adorable doing it. The tutu was a strategic masterpiece of distraction." I allowed myself a small internal smile. These were my people. This was my world. A world of life and death, held in balance by skill, trust, and the quiet camaraderie of the surgical team. We were 30 minutes into the excision when the OR doors swished open. It was a sound that should not have happened. An unscheduled entry into a sterile field during a heart transplant was more than a breach of protocol. It was an act of sacrilege. My head snapped up. Standing in the doorway were two figures. One was Dr. Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of smug solemnity. The other was Dr. Caldwell, the hospital administrator, a man whose presence in an OR meant something was profoundly wrong. He was wearing paper scrubs over his suit, looking deeply uncomfortable. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, my voice dangerously low. "This is a sterile field. Get out." Caldwell took a hesitant step forward, holding a tablet. "Dr. Vance, I'm afraid we have a situation." "The only situation here, Caldwell, is a man with no heart in his chest." "Whatever you have to say can wait." My eyes darted to the bypass monitor. Everything was stable. For now. Thorne stepped past Caldwell. "I'm afraid it can't, Aliner." He looked from my face to the open cavity in Mr. Davies' chest and then to the perfusionist running the bypass machine. A flicker of something triumph passed through his eyes. "There's been a formal complaint," Caldwell said, his voice strained. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "An accusation of a serious protocol violation regarding the donor matching process for this procedure." I stared at him, bewildered. My mind raced. The donor match was perfect. I had triple-checked the serology, the sizing, the cross-matching myself. It was textbook. "That's absurd. The match is perfect." "Who filed this complaint?" Thorne answered, his voice smooth as silk. "I did. I had concerns about the paperwork you filed. It seemed rushed. In my opinion, you proceeded without full due diligence, endangering the patient." The scalpel in my hand felt suddenly heavy. A cold dread, colder than the chill of the OR, began to creep up my spine. This was a coup. It was happening right here, right now, over the open chest of my patient. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I struggled to control. "The paperwork is flawless and you know it. Now, for the last time, get out of my OR." Caldwell cleared his throat and looked at the tablet in his hand. "Dr. Vance, pursuant to hospital bylaws, when a complaint of this nature is filed by another senior surgeon, an immediate review is required. And until that review is complete, I'm afraid you are being suspended from all surgical duties effective immediately." The words hung in the air, obscene and unreal. Suspended. Now, my team was frozen. Liam's eyes were wide with disbelief. Lena had turned from her monitors, her face pale. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Look at him." I gestured with the scalpel toward the patient. "He's on bypass. His heart is in a bucket. This man will die if this procedure is not completed within the next 2 hours. Caldwell finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic sort of pity. "The hospital has a duty to act, Aliner. We can't risk proceeding with you in command while this cloud hangs over the procedure." "So what's your plan, Caldwell?" I spat, my professionalism shattering. "You going to finish this transplant? Do you know which end of the scalpel to hold?" Thorne stepped forward, and a nurse I didn't recognize immediately moved to his side, holding out a pair of sterile gloves. "That won't be necessary," Marcus said, pulling them on with a sickening snap. "The hospital has asked me to step in and complete the procedure to ensure patient safety." He looked at me, his eyes devoid of any emotion except a cold, calculated ambition. "Don't worry, Aliner," he said. "Your patient is in good hands." A second nurse entered, pushing a stainless steel cart. On it, shrouded in a sterile cloth, was not the cooler containing the donor heart. It was a larger metallic case, emblazoned with a single, sleek logo I recognized with a jolt of pure horror. Omni Med. Thorne saw the recognition in my eyes. "As the donor heart's provenance is now in question," he announced to the stunned room, "I've made the executive decision to proceed with the OmniCore V7. It's the only viable option to save his life at this point." It all clicked into place. The complaint, the timing, the immediate suspension, the artificial heart waiting in the wings. This wasn't a review, it was an execution, my execution. And Alistair Davies, the man on my table, was the sacrificial lamb. They weren't just removing me. They were turning my patient into a lab rat for a faulty device, and they were doing it while his life hung by a thread. I looked at Liam, my trusted nurse, and saw a silent question in his eyes. What do we do? I had no answer. I was a god in my own temple, and I had just been overthrown. My gloved hands clenched into fists. A primal scream built in my throat, but I choked it down. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not for me, but for Alastair Davies. His life was being measured in the minutes ticking by on the digital clock on the wall. Every second we wasted in this grotesque theater of ambition was a second his brain was being deprived of perfectly oxygenated blood. "Marcus, this is insane," I said, forcing my voice to be level, analytical. "The Omni Core has never been successfully implanted in a human subject with Davies' specific condition. The risk of thrombotic events is astronomical. We have a perfect, viable human heart waiting in the next room. This is medical malpractice." "Your opinion has been noted, doctor," Caldwell said, his tone that of a man reading a script. "But as you are currently suspended, you no longer have clinical authority on this case. Dr. Thorne is now the surgeon of record." "Surgeon of record?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Marcus hasn't performed a full transplant in 5 years. He's been too busy shaking hands at fundraisers and playing golf with medical device reps." Thorne, who was now scrubbing in with an almost theatrical intensity, shot a glare over his shoulder. "I am perfectly capable of handling this procedure, Eleanor. Perhaps more so, since my judgment isn't clouded by a reckless desire to cut corners." It was a perfectly crafted lie, designed to sow doubt among my team. I could feel their uncertainty, their fear. They were caught between their loyalty to me and the hospital's rigid chain of command. To defy a direct order from the administrator was career suicide. "Liam," I said, my voice low and urgent, not taking my eyes off Thorne, "run the final cross-match panel on the donor heart again. Now, get a printed copy." Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting between me and Caldwell. "Now, Liam," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. He nodded curtly and slipped out of the OR. It was a small act of defiance, a lifeline. "Lena," I turned to my anesthesiologist. "What's his clotting time? His platelet count?" Lena, ever the professional, rattled off the numbers from her monitor. "PT 22 seconds, platelet count 150,000. He's teetering on the edge of coagulopathy from the bypass. He'll never tolerate the Omni Core's material without throwing a massive clot." "My thoughts exactly," I said, turning back to the intruders. "You heard her. Implanting that device is a death sentence. It will cause a stroke on the table." Thorne walked towards me, now fully gowned and gloved. The nurse he'd brought with him, a woman I now recognized as one of his research assistants, began preparing the Omni-Med device, her movements brisk and efficient. They had rehearsed this. "We're aware of the risks," Thorne said smoothly, "and we have a new anticoagulation protocol provided by Omni-Med specifically for this device. It's cutting edge." "Cutting edge is code for wildly experimental, and you know it," I shot back. "You are using this man as a guinea pig in a corporate showcase." My mind was a maelstrom. Why Davies? Why this patient? The Pulitzer Prize winner, the investigative journalist. I remembered reading his last series of articles, an exposé on Big Pharma. He had been digging into. My blood ran cold. He had been digging into Omni-Med. He had written a scathing piece about their unethical trial practices just 3 months ago. He wasn't a high-profile patient they wanted to save. He was a threat they wanted to neutralize. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about Marcus Thorne's ambition or the hospital's fundraising. This was a hit, sanctioned and executed in the most sterile, brightly lit room imaginable. If Davies died on the table from a complication during a risky, experimental procedure, who would question it? It would be a tragedy, certainly. Dr. Thorne would hold a somber press conference. Omni-Med would release a statement mourning his loss and pledging to learn from the data. And Alastair Davies' investigation would die with him. "He's been investigating them," I said, the words barely a whisper. I looked at Thorne. "Davies, he's been investigating Omni-Med. That's what this is about." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Thorne's face before he masked it. He had underestimated me. He thought this was just a simple power play. "Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. You're hysterical," he snapped. "Am I?" I looked at Caldwell, whose face had gone ashen. He knew. The poor, spineless bastard knew exactly what was happening. He was an accomplice. "Administrator," I said, my voice now eerily calm. "I am formally requesting that you halt this procedure on the grounds that the chosen course of action is not in the patient's best interest and may, in fact, be deliberately intended to cause him harm. I want that noted in the official record." Caldwell flinched. The official record was a place he tried to avoid. "Your request is noted," he stammered, but Dr. Thorne's clinical judgment stands. We must proceed. Liam returned, holding a printout. He handed it to me, his hand brushing mine. Tucked underneath the lab report was a tiny, folded piece of paper. I took the report, my fingers closing around the hidden note. "The match is perfect," Liam announced loudly for the benefit of the room. "Antigen negative, zero mismatch, it's as good as a clone." "It doesn't matter," Thorne said, waving a dismissive hand. "That heart is now evidence in an investigation. We can't use it. Now, Alina, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the OR. Security is on its way to escort you out." He turned his back on me, a final, arrogant dismissal. He approached the operating table, ready to take my place. My place. My team looked at me, their faces a mixture of fear and appeal. I was their chief, their leader, and I was being thrown out like a novice med student. My career at Mount Sinai was over. I knew that. My reputation was probably in tatters, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the man whose life was literally open before us. My fingers uncurled, revealing the note from Liam. 4 words scribbled in haste. "Or camera is live." Every operating room in the hospital was equipped with a high-resolution camera used for teaching and archival purposes. We almost never turned them on. But Liam, my quiet, unassuming shadow, had. The camera, mounted on the ceiling boom, was recording everything, every word, every action. A new plan, desperate and wild, began to form in my mind. They wanted me out of the room. Fine. But they couldn't erase what I knew. I looked at Lena, my anesthesiologist, and our eyes met. She had been with me for 7 years. We seen each other through messy divorces, sick children, and 20-hour surgeries. I gave her the slightest of nods, a signal we had developed long ago. It meant, follow my lead no matter what. She nodded back, her expression grim but resolute. "All right, Marcus," I said, my voice suddenly devoid of fight. "You win." Thorne turned, a look of surprise on his face. I began to untie my surgical gown. "The patient is all yours. I'll be in my office, waiting for the news from security." I let the gown fall from my shoulders, and a nurse I didn't know scurried to take it. I stepped back from the table, away from the sterile field. For a moment, Thorne just stared at me, suspicious. He had expected a fight to the bitter end. My capitulation was more unnerving than my rage. "Good," he said finally, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "A wise decision." I walked toward the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. As I passed the anesthesia station, I stumbled slightly, my hand brushing against a bank of controls on Lena's machine. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Watch yourself, doctor," Lena said, her voice laced with false concern. "You look a little unsteady." "I'm fine," I said, and pushed the door open, stepping out of my sanctuary and into the unknown. The moment the door swished shut behind me, Lena's fingers flew across her console. The move I had made was no accident. I had brushed the master alarm override, a function that required a secondary confirmation to activate. Lena provided it. Inside the OR, a cacophony of alarms would now be screaming. The bypass machine would appear to be failing. The ventilator would signal a critical error. Every monitor connected to Alistair Davies would flash red and emit a piercing shriek. It was a phantom crisis, a ghost in the machine that only Lena and I knew was false. To Marcus Thorne, it would look like the patient was crashing hard, and he was now in charge alone in the middle of a 5-alarm fire he didn't start and didn't know how to put out. He had stolen my patient. Now, he was about to find out what it truly meant to be responsible for his life. And I, standing in the hallway, had just started the clock on his nightmare. The hallway felt alien. The muted beeps of distant machines and the squeak of soft-soled shoes were a world away from the focused intensity of the OR. I leaned against the cool wall, my own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was no longer a surgeon. I was a saboteur, a gambler who had just pushed all her chips into the center of the table. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my scrubs. It was a text from Liam. He's panicking. Doesn't know which alarm to check first. Lena is a rock star. A grim smile touched my lips. I could picture the scene perfectly. Thorne, the consummate politician, was a fish out of water. He excelled at schmoozing donors and navigating hospital bureaucracy, but the raw, chaotic reality of a full-scale code was beyond his skill set. He knew the theory, but his instincts had been dulled by years of disuse. He was a pilot who had only ever flown a simulator, suddenly thrust into the cockpit of a crashing jet. Lena, on the other hand, was born for chaos. She was a master of her craft, capable of running 3 separate codes at once while calmly sipping her tea. She would be feeding Thorne a steady stream of terrifying, but false, data. She would point to phantom pressure drops and non-existent arrhythmias, her face a mask of professional concern, all while keeping Davies perfectly stable. I pushed off the wall and began walking, not towards my office, but towards the surgical wing's administrative hub. I needed a computer. The video feed from the OR camera was my ace in the hole, but a raw recording wasn't enough. I needed to get it out. I needed to give it to someone who would know what to do with it. My mind raced, sorting through a mental Rolodex of contacts. Who could I trust? The hospital's legal department was compromised. The police? They wouldn't understand the medical nuances, and OmniMed's lawyers would bury them in paperwork before they could even get a warrant. I needed someone faster, someone who understood the power of a story. Alastair Davies. The irony was savage. The one person who could blow this wide open was the man lying unconscious, his life in the balance just a few yards away. But he had a network. He had colleagues. He had an editor. I remembered a name from one of his articles, a woman he had credited with unflagging courage and a bloodhound's nose for the truth. Jessica Riley, a senior editor at the New York Chronicle. Finding her contact information wasn't hard. A quick search on my phone, a little creative social engineering with a junior administrator I once helped get her son an appointment with the best pediatric neurologist in the city, and I had Jessica Riley's private cell number. I found an empty on-call room, locked the door, and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking. "This is Riley," a brisk, no-nonsense voice answered on the second ring. "Ms. Riley, my name is Dr. Alina Vance. I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Mount Sinai. I was your reporter Alastair Davies' surgeon." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Is he? What happened? "He's alive," I said quickly. "But he's in grave danger, and I believe it's because of his investigation into OmniMed." The silence that followed was heavy with professional skepticism. "That's a very serious accusation, doctor. You'll need more than a belief." "I have more," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I have a live video feed from the operating room where a rival surgeon, in collusion with the hospital administration, is right now attempting to implant a faulty, experimental OmniMed device into his heart under false pretenses. They created a baseless complaint to have me suspended mid-procedure to make it happen." Another beat of silence. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. She was looking me up. "You're Alina Vance. Heart fixer, top of your field, flawless record." The skepticism in her voice was being replaced by a dawning curiosity. Why would they do that? To silence him. If he dies of surgical complications, his investigation dies too. The OmniCore device they're using, it's a killer. It's designed to fail in a way that looks like a natural complication. A stroke, a massive embolism, plausible deniability. "And you can prove this?" This was the moment. "I have a live feed. It's being recorded. It shows everything. My suspension, Thorne taking over, the OmniMed device being brought in. It's all there. But I need to get it out of the hospital's server and into your hands before they realize what's happening and wipe it." "How?" I looked at the desktop computer in the corner of the on-call room. "I need a secure, encrypted link, something I can upload a large video file to untraceably." "I can do that," she said, her voice now charged with adrenaline. "Give me 90 seconds. The next 90 seconds were the longest of my life. I logged into the hospital's network, my fingers flying across the keyboard. My credentials were still active. They hadn't gotten around to revoking them yet, a foolish oversight on their part. I navigated through firewalls and security protocols to the server that stored the OR video archives. The file was there, growing larger by the second, a red light next to its name indicating a live recording. My phone chimed. A text from Jessica Riley. It was a long, complex string of characters. The upload link. I initiated the transfer. The progress bar that appeared on the screen seemed to crawl. 1%, 2%. It was a massive, high-definition video file. This would take time I didn't know if I had. Another buzz from my phone, a text from Liam. "Security is here. They're looking for you. Caldwell is with them. They're not happy." My blood ran cold. They knew I hadn't gone to my office. They were hunting for me. I looked at the progress bar. 18%. Then another text from Liam. "Thorne is demanding Lena push epi. Says the patient's pressure is bottoming out. She's refusing, buying time. Good girl, Lena. She was walking a tightrope. Refusing a direct order from the surgeon of record was grounds for immediate dismissal and a review of her license. She was putting her entire career on the line for me, for Davies." I could hear footsteps in the hallway now, voices, tense and angry. "Check all the on-call rooms on this floor." It was Caldwell's reedy, panicked voice. I killed the monitor, plunging the room into near darkness, and slid under the narrow bed, pulling a stray blanket over me. The laptop was on the floor with me, the faint glow of its screen a beacon in the dark. 41%. The door to the room rattled. It was locked. "This one's locked," a gruff voice, a security guard shouted. "Vance, Dr. Vance, I know you're in there," Caldwell shrieked. "Open this door right now. You're making this so much worse for yourself? Worse than being an accomplice to a murder?" I doubted that. There was a jangling of keys, then a metallic click as the master key was inserted into the lock. I held my breath. The laptop glowed. 63%. The door swung open. A beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. It panned over the desk, the empty chair, the small bathroom. I flattened myself against the floor, praying the overhanging blanket would hide me. The beam passed over the bed, lingered for a moment, and then moved on. "She's not here," the guard said. "Let's check the next one." "She has to be on this floor somewhere," Caldwell muttered, his voice receding as they moved down the hall. "Find her." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone again in the darkness. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My entire body was trembling. 88%. My phone buzzed one last time. It wasn't from Liam. It was from Jessica Riley. "Got it, the file is secure. What's your next move, doctor?" 99%. 100%. Upload complete. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. I had done it. The evidence was out. The story was in the hands of someone who would know how to tell it. My next move. Thorne and Caldwell thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me, removed me from the equation. They were about to learn that you don't corner an animal and leave it with no way out. I crawled out from under the bed, my joints aching. I had a choice. I could disappear, let Jessica Riley handle it and hope for the best, or I could go back. There was no choice, really. I still had a patient on the table. And as long as his chest was open, he was my patient, my responsibility. Suspension be damned. I walked to the door, took one last, centering breath, and unlocked it. I stepped out into the bright hallway, my head held high. A few doors down, Caldwell and the security guards were trying to open another locked door. "Looking for me, administrator?" I called out. Their heads whipped around. The look on Caldwell's face was a mixture of fury and fear. "Dr. Vance," he sputtered, "you are in violation of a direct order. You are trespassing in a restricted area. Guards, escort her from the premises." The two guards, big men who looked more suited to bouncing drunks out of a bar than handling a surgeon, started walking towards me. I held up a hand. "Before you do that," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "you might want to call the hospital's public relations department. And you'll probably want to get your board of directors on the phone. Because in about 10 minutes, the New York Chronicle is going to post a story on their website. A story with a headline that will probably read something like, Mount Sinai and Omni Med implicated in attempted murder of Pulitzer prize-winning journalist in the operating room. And they have a video, a very clear, very damning video." I let that sink in. Caldwell's face went from pale to ghostly white. The guards stopped in their tracks, looking uncertainly at their boss. "You're bluffing," Caldwell whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Am I?" I smiled, a cold, sharp smile he had never seen before. "There's one way to find out. But while you're making phone calls, a man is dying in OR3. Dr. Thorne is in over his head, the patient is unstable, and there is a perfectly good heart being left to expire in a cooler. So I'm going back in there to finish my surgery, and I suggest no one tries to stop me." I turned my back on them and started walking, each step sure and steady, back towards the operating room. Back to my sanctuary. Back to my patient. I didn't know if they would follow me or tackle me or simply stand there in stunned silence. All I knew was that the game had changed. I wasn't just fighting for a man's life anymore. I was fighting for the truth. And this time I had an army at my back. The doors to OR3 swished open before me. I didn't pause. I strode in, and the scene was exactly as I had pictured, controlled chaos. The alarms Lena had triggered were still blaring, a symphony of manufactured disaster. Thorne was shouting orders at a terrified-looking resident, pointing frantically at a monitor displaying the wildly fluctuating and entirely false blood pressure readings. The OmniMed device lay on its sterile tray, untouched. They hadn't even begun the implantation. "Turn off the alarms, Lena," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Thorne's jaw dropped. The resident stared, wide-eyed. My team, Liam, Lena, my scrub nurse, looked at me with a dawning sense of hope. "Eleanor, what the hell are you doing here?" Thorne stammered, his face flushed with anger and panic. "I told you to leave. Security." "Security is a little preoccupied at the moment, Marcus," I said, walking directly to the scrub sink. They're trying to figure out how to manage a public relations nightmare. As are you. I began to scrub in, the familiar ritual calming my nerves, focusing my mind. Administrator Caldwell is likely on the phone with the hospital's lawyers right now, discovering the precise legal definition of accessory to attempted murder. Thorne's face went from red to a sickly, mottled white. He knew. He saw in my eyes that the bluff, if he ever thought it was one, had been called. Lena, what's his real status? I asked as I finished scrubbing and turned to be gowned and gloved. Lena, her expression now perfectly placid, silenced the alarms with a few keystrokes. The sudden silence was deafening. Patient has been stable on bypass for the duration, doctor. Vitals are rock solid. BP 115 over 75, 0 PVCs. He's perfectly fine. Thorne stared at her, then back at the monitor, which now displayed a steady, reassuring green line. The truth dawned on him. You faked a code? He whispered, aghast. I took measures to protect my patient from an unnecessary and dangerous experimental procedure. I corrected him, holding my hands out as Liam fitted new sterile gloves onto them. Something you should have done. I turned to the nurse who had been assisting Thorne. Please remove that piece of hardware from the instrument table and bring me the donor heart. Now. The nurse looked at Thorne, then at me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Do it, Thorne croaked. He looked like a deflated balloon. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by the cold, hard terror of a man who sees the abyss opening up beneath him. He knew he was ruined. His career, his reputation, everything he had schemed and clawed for was evaporating in the sterile air of this room. He began to back away from the table, stripping off his gloves. I was only following the administrator's directive, he mumbled, already trying to build his defense. The complaint was legitimate, I had concerns. Save it for the deposition, Marcus, I said, not even bothering to look at him. My focus was back where it belonged, on the patient. Get out of my operating room. He stumbled out of the OR without another word, a broken man. The door swished shut, and a collective, unspoken sigh of relief seemed to pass through my team. The sanctuary was ours again. All right, people, I said, my voice crisp and in command. We've wasted enough time. Let's save Mr. Davies' life. Liam, what's the ischemic time on the donor heart? Just under an hour, doctor. Still well within the window, he replied, a grin evident even behind his surgical mask as he carefully placed the cooler on a stand next to me. Let's not push it. Let's get this heart in and beating. Sutures. The next 90 minutes were a blur of intense, focused work. It was a race against the clock, but it was a race I knew how to win. My hands moved with a speed and precision born of thousands of hours of practice. The tiny, curved needles flashed in the light as I stitched the great vessels, the aorta, the pulmonary artery, the vena cava, connecting the lifeless donor heart to Alistair Davies' body. My team moved around me in a silent, practiced ballet. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. We were a single organism, united in one purpose. The tension of the last hour had been replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. We were not just performing a surgery, we were reclaiming our profession. We were pushing back against the corruption and greed that had tried to poison our sanctuary. Ready to release the cross-clamp, I announced, my eyes scanning the newly stitched connections one last time. Everyone ready? A chorus of affirmatives answered me. Okay, Lena, let's give him a little push. 100 of lidocaine. Lidocaine in, she confirmed. All right, I said, taking the clamp. Let's wake this heart up. I released the clamp. Blood, rich and red and warm, flowed from Davies' aorta into the coronary arteries of the new heart. For a moment, nothing happened. The heart lay still and pale in his chest. It's a moment that never gets easier, the moment of truth. Come on, I whispered. Beat. The muscle quivered. A single, weak fibrillation. Charge the paddles to 10, I said. Liam placed the internal paddles on the heart. Charged. Clear. The heart jumped as the electric current passed through it. On the monitor, the flat line jagged into a chaotic rhythm. Still in VFib. Let's go again. 20. Charged. Clear. Another jolt. And then it happened. A single, strong contraction, then another, and another. The chaotic scribble on the monitor resolved itself into the steady, beautiful peaks and valleys of a normal sinus rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked them away fiercely. We have a beat, Liam said softly, his voice thick with emotion. It's a good, strong beat, I replied, my voice hoarse. Let's wean him off bypass. Slowly, carefully, we transitioned the workload from the machine back to the new heart and lungs. The heart took the load without faltering. Its rhythm was perfect. Its strength was undeniable. It was a heart that would allow Alastair Davies to live, to breathe, to write, to tell his stories. To tell this story. As we prepared to close his chest, the doors to the OR opened one more time. This time it was Thorne or Caldwell. It was a woman in a sharp business suit, flanked by two men who had lawyer written all over them. She had a kind but firm face and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Dr. Vance," she said. "My name is Catherine Shaw. I'm the chair of the board of directors for Mount Sinai. I'd like to have a word when you're finished here." I simply nodded, my attention fixed on placing the final sternal wires. "I'll be another 20 minutes, I said. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the OR, my mask and cap removed, my face etched with exhaustion and triumph. Catherine Shaw was waiting for me. "Doctor," she said, her voice grave. "I have spent the last hour on the phone with our legal team and a reporter from the New York Chronicle. I have also seen a video that has left me appalled. On behalf of the board, I want to offer you our most profound apologies." "Apologies are a start," I said, my voice flat, "but they don't fix a system that allowed this to happen." "I agree," she said, meeting my gaze without flinching. "Dr. Caldwell has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His employment and that of Dr. Thorne will be terminated. We are self-reporting this incident to the State Medical Board and the District Attorney's Office. We will cooperate fully, and we are severing all ties with OmniMed effective immediately." It was more than I had expected. It was decisive. It was right. "And you, doctor?" she asked. "What do you want?" It was a question I hadn't even allowed myself to consider. What did I want? I wanted to go home and sleep for a week. I wanted to never see the inside of a boardroom again, but I also knew this couldn't be the end of it. "I want to know this will never happen again," I said. "To any patient, in any hospital, I want a review of all our partnerships with medical device and pharmaceutical companies. I want a new, transparent process for handling internal complaints. I want a patient advocacy committee with real power, and I want to lead it." Catherine Shaw looked at me, a long, appraising look. A slow smile spread across her face. "I had a feeling you might say that," she said. "I think that can be arranged, but first, there's someone who wants to see you." She led me down the hall to the surgical ICU. In a private room, just beginning to stir from the fog of anesthesia, was Alastair Davies. His daughter was sitting by his bedside, holding his hand. She looked up as we entered, her eyes red from crying but shining with relief. She stood up and threw her arms around me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my father." I looked over her shoulder at the man in the bed. His eyes were open, and though he couldn't speak past the breathing tube, his gaze was clear and intelligent. He looked at me and he knew. I didn't know how, but he knew he had been in a fight for his life, not just on a surgical table, but in a war he'd been waging for months. He lifted a hand weakly and gave me a thumbs up. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I had broken rules. I had risked my career, my license, my entire future. But I had saved a good man's life and exposed a terrible evil. I had lost my place in the sanctuary, only to find that my real purpose lay outside its walls, fighting to protect what it stood for. My battle at Mount Sinai was over. But a much larger war, the war for the soul of medicine, was just beginning, and I was ready to fight. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The New York Chronicle story, penned by a furiously dedicated Jessica Riley, landed like a bombshell. It had everything: a heroic doctor, a villainous rival, a corrupt corporation, a secret video, and a patient whose life and work hung in the balance. It was more than a hospital scandal. It became a national conversation about ethics in medicine and corporate influence in healthcare. OmniMed's stock plummeted. The FDA launched a full-scale investigation into their entire product line. Thorne and Caldwell were indicted. The fallout was swift and brutal. For me, life changed in ways I could never have imagined. I was no longer just the heart fixer, a surgeon known within the cloistered world of medicine. I was on the cover of magazines. I was interviewed on news programs, not as a doctor discussing a new surgical technique, but as an advocate, a whistleblower. The hospital, under Catherine Shaw's decisive leadership, made good on every promise. They cleaned house, severing ties with any company that even hinted at unethical practices. And they created the Vance Institute for Medical Ethics, an independent oversight body within the hospital, and made me its first director. My surgical practice was smaller now, by choice. I still operated, still found solace in the quiet, focused sanctity of the OR, but my time was divided. I spent hours in meetings, poring over contracts, vetting new technologies, and developing protocols that would protect patients and doctors alike from the kind of insidious corruption that had almost cost Alastair Davies his life. Liam became the nursing director for the entire surgical wing, and Lena was promoted to chief of anesthesiology. We were a team, not just in the OR, but in our shared mission to reform the system from within. About 3 months after his surgery, Alastair Davies walked into my new office. He looked years younger, his step firm, his eyes bright with a renewed fire. He was holding a copy of his new book. The cover was stark white with a simple black title, The God Complex, Greed, Corruption, and the Fight for the Soul of American Medicine. He placed it on my desk. "The first copy," he said, his voice raspy but strong. "I believe it belongs to you." I picked it up. The dedication page had only one sentence, for Dr. Alina Vance, who remembered that the first rule of medicine is not a suggestion. "I don't know what to say, Alastair," I murmured, my throat tight. "Don't say anything," he said, smiling. "Just keep doing what you're doing. There are a lot of stories that still need to be told. Thanks to you, I get to keep telling them. And thanks to me," he added with a wink, "a lot more people are going to be listening to you." We talked for an hour, no longer doctor and patient, but allies. He told me about the new leads his story had generated, the calls from other whistleblowers, the vast, tangled web of deceit he was just beginning to unravel. I told him about the changes we were making at the hospital, the small victories and the monumental challenges that still lay ahead. When he left, I felt a profound sense of peace. The world is not a perfect place. Greed and ambition will always seek to exploit the vulnerable. But that day, I was reminded that the fight against the darkness is never waged alone. It is won by small acts of courage, by people who refuse to look away, who dare to speak up, who remember their purpose. My story could have ended in that operating room. It could have been a quiet tragedy, a footnote in a hospital's legal filings. I could have been a surgeon, disgraced and dismissed, another casualty of a corrupt system. But because of the loyalty of a good nurse, the integrity of an anesthesiologist, and the courage of a journalist, it became something else entirely. It became a beginning. I sometimes walk the halls of the hospital late at night, when the only sounds are the gentle hum of machines and the soft footsteps of the night shift. I look into the rooms of the sleeping patients, and I see more than just charts and diagnoses. I see stories. I see lives filled with hope and fear, love and loss. They place their trust in us, an almost sacred trust, believing we will honor it. What happened to me was a violation of that trust, but it was also a powerful, painful gift. It forced me out of the comfortable confines of my operating room and into a much larger fight. It taught me that a surgeon's hands, no matter how skilled, can only save one life at a time. But a voice, a clear, strong voice speaking the truth, can save countless more. My name is Dr. Alina Vance. I am a surgeon. I am an advocate. I am a guardian of the promise we make to every person who comes through our doors, to first do no harm. And I have learned that this promise is not a passive oath, but an active, daily battle. It is a battle I am now proud to lead, not just with a scalpel, but with a voice that will never again be silenced. The heart is a resilient muscle, capable of healing, of beating strong and true even after the deepest cuts. And as I discovered, so is the human spirit.